Well, welcome to Your Story with Melinda. And today we're talking about a very important topic that needs to be talked about: mental illness. Did you know that 1 in 5 Canadians struggle with mental illness every year? So what I did was I brought in Jordan Berta, who has struggled with anxiety all of his life. He's the host of the Unspoken Conversation, and he came in to share about his story, how he overcame and actually every day works hard to end the stigma of mental illness. He shares his thoughts about how the church can help those struggling with mental illness and how focusing on Jesus can reframe your thinking about mental illness by focusing on Jesus' love and his character that will help set you free. This is the show to watch. Jordan Berta, so great to have you here on the show. It's funny how we've actually known of each other. We have a lot of mutual friends, but this is the first time we're actually meeting right here in the studio. So I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you, Melinda, and it's an honor to be here as well.
Good. Now you're also a podcaster, which I think is pretty cool. I love meeting other podcasters along the journey. The Unspoken Conversation. What's that about?
Well, the goal is to expand the conversation of mental health, faith, community, and the arts. Because what I realized going through a dark time is that I was trying to get people around me to understand what I was going through. And there were some people that did, but there were some people that would just give horrible advice and just comments that would just be hurtful. And I really wanted to change that, but I just knew that getting angry and just trying to convince someone of the facts wasn't going to work. I realized that sharing stories and inspiring change would be the way to do it. So that's what we're doing.
Exactly. So the Unspoken Conversation comes from your own personal story and struggle with, with mental health. So Jordan, take me back. Talk to me about, you and how, the story of mental health came about that actually sort of like propelled you into this conversation as a speaker and as a communicator.
I think it was the whole thing was the perfect storm, because ever since I was a little kid, and my grandpa's in the facility here, and he'd confirm that ever since I was a little kid, I knew that I wanted to be a pastor or a speaker or something like that, just that desire to communicate. He used to lead like a men's fellowship gathering, and he held me up at the podium once, and I was grabbing the mic at like a year old, which I guess makes sense for what we're doing now. And so I always had that desire to speak. I always had that desire to share good news, to share truth with people. But for the longest time, I didn't feel like I had a unique thing to say. I could just say stuff that was good and that was true, but nothing really stood out until Labor Day of 2013. I had been experiencing chest pain for about 3 months, and I was in my early 20s. I felt ashamed, so I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want any judgment, so I didn't say anything.
Well, what did you think it was? Like chest pains? Did you think you were having a heart attack? When people have chest pains, they naturally think it's like, I'm having a heart attack, there's something happening.
Absolutely. And I was convinced, at some point, this is just going to end, and, I'm done.
You're done, okay.
But I was still too afraid to say anything. And so then the time came where I was working in customer service at the time, and I'm at work, and now I'm getting every symptom. I'm getting the arm numbness, and the chest pain's getting a lot worse. And I went up to my boss, and if I remember correctly, I actually said, I think I'm having a heart attack. I'll be in touch if I'm still alive tomorrow. And then I just ran out the door.
Wow, okay.
And so I'm driving, I get in my car, and I needed to go to a clinic. I had to see a doctor at this point. It's it is too late. I have to see a doctor. The problem is, it was Labor Day. So everything except for the only hospital in town was closed for Labor Day. So I go to the hospital, I describe my situation, and they said, okay, well, sit down, it'll be about an 8-hour wait. And I said, well, I'd rather die at home. And I went.
Now you still think that you're having a heart attack?
Yep.
So you don't have any idea that this could be anxiety
Oh.
or stress? Because
Not
immediately I
one
think for
bit.
most people, because it's a physical symptom, it's something physical. So right, like it's either like it's a heart attack, it's some kind of indigestion, it's something wrong with your body. Correct?
Right.
Like okay. So you're saying I'd rather go home and die.
Yep.
Because I'm feeling. Okay. So what happens?
So I go home, and my grandfather, who had just gotten over a stroke, had a blood pressure monitor at home, and so he put it around my arm, and I was probably triple what my blood pressure should have been, and I just couldn't calm down. I could have started like 3 new businesses and walked to Australia with the amount of energy
Right.
that was pent up in me at that moment. And I had no idea what to do. Just that desperation to just be able to sit down, to just be able to carry out this conversation that I'm having with you right now. Like I was going crazy. And so I called my doctor and I said, I have to see you. Like the next day I called, I have to see you. And so I get into the doctor's office and he said, just to be sure, I'm going to send you for some tests for your heart and for all this. But I've got a challenge for you. I've got a 60-item survey of symptoms, and I'd like you to check off however many of them you've dealt with in the past week. And it was all but like 1 or 2 that I checked off. He said, well, I think we have our answer.
Okay.
So he diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder and gave me medication. And of course, as many people would know listening to this that have taken medication for anything, it doesn't always help right away. So there was that, maybe about a 2-week period that was still really hard. But when it really came down to it, that brought my stress down, that brought my anxiety down, and that really gave me the opportunity to keep on going.
So Jordan, how do you feel when you start realizing you have anxiety? Because I wouldn't think, for somebody who, like for me, I'm always on the go. I'm always, I've got stress. Sometimes I can't breathe because I'm faced with lots of deadlines and things. How do you make sense of that anxiety is a mental illness? Like when you started feeling this way, how did that become like I'm now on this journey of, of a mental health journey, of a mental illness, the connection, and then how did you feel about that? Because I believe a lot of viewers and listeners are going, I have that, but I just sort of like take some breaths and on my way, I don't realize I have maybe a mental health challenge.
Right. I think for me, I was relieved.
That
I knew what the problem was.
Okay, yeah.
Because I had been in counselors' offices for many years because a couple years before that, I had left a job because of just a lot of challenges with coworkers and with my boss. And I had been to counseling through that process. These situations kept on happening and happening and happening. And the physical symptoms didn't start until after all of my relationships seemed to be fixed.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So, and I didn't see that at the time. I didn't figure that out until after. But what I saw was that there was always a problem. Whether it was...
Like you're saying, there was always a problem with you as far as relating with people and how to... Okay. And in your and in work situations and in situations.
Right. And then when those resolved themselves, it went physical.
Okay.
Because it was like the anxiety, the way I like to describe it is it's like the anxiety and the inner turmoil had to come out somehow.
Right.
And if it couldn't manifest itself in a challenging relationship, it was going to attack me physically.
So you said that you felt relief when you realized that it was anxiety. So now there's a word to it.
Yep.
But how do you feel personally as a follower of Jesus, as someone who's in the church and who's a Christian? How did that reconcile or not reconcile with you to say, here I have mental illness, but I'm I'm a Christian? And I say that because I know that that's a question that, Christians have had. Just because there's this struggle, like, Christians in the culture, it's like you can overcome anything. Why would you be having these attacks when the Holy Spirit's in you? Like, I know, I've heard. How did you reconcile it all?
I think God is a lot bigger than how we define him, right? Like, and even watching your program, I see these kinds of stories of people that overcome different things. Like, specifically, I'm thinking about Clayton King and the amount of loss that he had gone through in that short period of time. Or even you look back at Job and think that he was doing things for God. He was a faithful servant of God, and yet all these things are happening to him. But yet I also then think about the fact that Jesus saved us as believers not because we're anything good, but because he is good. So I don't think I would have said all of this clearly back when that had first happened, but I think ultimately that came to my heart really quickly, knowing, that I had been so well taught of the love of God that didn't really concern me, because I knew that God loved me for who I was and wanted to help me become the strongest person that I can be. Unfortunately, the church doesn't always match up to Jesus. In how they view people and in how they treat people.
Jordan, before we get to the church, I think that's a beautiful way of reframing when you have been diagnosed or are diagnosed with a mental illness. Because what you've just done is smash the stigma that, you are less, that you are broken, that you cannot overcome, but you've reframed it in such a way to say, I have this, but I know who Jesus is and his character and how he loves me, and that's what I focus on, and that's the hope that comes. I think that's fantastic, because a lot of people focus on the condition and the illness, and the church does, and culture and society will look at somebody with, they have that, versus saying, wait a second, especially in the church, actually, Jesus came for people like us. And when we focus on the love of him and his character, then even if I am broken, and we all are, and we have an illness or we've been diagnosed, we can still live with hope and joy even in the midst of this. That's beautiful. That is such great encouragement for people, because literally reframing from, the stigma to basically, actually, I know who I am in Christ. That's fantastic. You mentioned the church, and I would say, that's something I want to talk about, because I believe the church is the place where, those that struggle with mental health should come. Like, if there's any place in the world, they should be flocking to the church, because the church should be the ones with open arms to say, come. But even in my growing up in the church, we never talked about it. If it was always hushed, or people would make excuses for, or people would try to pray it out of them. And It was such a, some of the experiences, and not that, church is all bad. I think it's come a long way, because there's more conversations about it now. But, what's your encouragement to the church to do this well, to engage people in their, sort of mental health journey?
Well, I think part of it is actually not thinking about the mental health side of it. And I am not saying to ignore the situation at hand. I tell my audience every week that if you are in a situation that you need to seek professional help, do it and do it now.
Yeah.
But I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he had made the point, he's like, I just wish that we didn't have to talk about this anymore. And I'm like, that's interesting. Well, I'd need to find something new to do. But I think the point was that if we need to get to a point where we don't have to highlight it, because it is just so ingrained in who we are, that we accept people, right?
So wait, so you don't want to highlight the mental illness? Is that what you're saying? You're saying not highlight that people have it, or? What
I'm saying is someday I would love for mental illness to be addressed the same way that migraine headaches are. That we love people, we accept people, and we don't doubt someone's faith
Yeah.
because of it, right? Someone comes up to me and says, I have a migraine. I'm not saying, did you pray enough this week? Did you miss church? I didn't see you at that Bible study. So I'm not saying that we ignore it at all. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about it passionately. But my point is simply, I would love to see the day where it's no longer flashy or interesting because people are simply dealing with the situations of their lives and being accepted for who they are.
Yeah. That's good. I remember, the first time I shared publicly about me going through what I called the dark night of the soul, when I went through a very dark depression for 6 months. And I remember with fear and trepidation thinking how people would judge me for sharing about this depression. Because even back then, like depression, like Melinda, how could you be depressed? You've got all this opportunity, you've got this great church community around you, you're a follower of Jesus, you know Jesus, and then you go dark. And I remember, I will never forget those 6 months, and I'm so thankful for my community who helped me and my therapist and my doctor. But I remember the first time I shared it, and I'm like, it was actually, I'll be honest, it was scarier in a way to talk about depression than it was to talk about my divorce. Which is fascinating, right? I was actually more fearful. And I remember sharing on a stage at a women's conference, and I decided, okay, this is going to be the first time, and I shared it. And I was looking over the crowd, and the crowd went silent. And later, after I spoke, there was about an hour and a half, 2 hour lineup of women who wanted prayer. And the number one thing that the women came for prayer for was their own depression and their own struggles with anxiety. And they said that we've never heard a woman actually publicly share that and be honest about it. And I remember just weeping and thinking, God, thank you for giving me the courage to share that, because it kind of opened up a freedom and healing for other women. But I didn't realize, too, how many women in the church at that time, in my life, struggle with depression. I honestly didn't know. I was like shocked how many women were like, I struggle with depression, situational depression, circumstantial depression, clinical depression. Like, it just was constant, Jordan.
Yeah. And you know what? We actually, and it's interesting now that this phrase is coming out there, but we, in a different way, we almost called our program Me Too for this exact reason, because I would tell people my story, and the most common response I would get is, me too. Man, I really get that. I dealt with something like that, or I have a family member that dealt with something like that. The amount of Me Too stories made me realize that this could have a huge reach, because there is not a single person in the world that is not impacted by mental illness. One of the stats say that in Canada, 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health problem this year.
Wow.
And many of them don't go to a doctor, don't seek medical help. And so there are so many Me Too stories that are just waiting and struggling and probably listening to both of our programs, still scared to bring it up.
Right.
And still scared to say something.
So what would you say as far as somebody's listening and saying, I have that kind of anxiety and shortness of breath that, Jordan's experienced, I'm either slipping into a depression or been depressed and have kind of denied it. What's sort of the first steps and things that people should do, so that they can, so that they don't have to hide in the shadows anymore, be fearful of being known that they might be struggling with this?
First thing is tell someone. And yes, I will say very passionately, be sure to book a doctor's appointment or some kind of mental health appointment ASAP, of course. But tell someone in your life. And I would hope and pray that there is someone that you feel that you can trust. But just the act of saying it. We both, love and support Crossroads. And that's one of the great things about their prayer line, right? Is that even if you make that phone call and say, just the fact that you can say it, there is something in admitting what is going on, acknowledging the situation. I tell people every week to embrace their process. And that doesn't mean that they have to enjoy it. That doesn't mean that it's easy. But you can't change what you don't acknowledge.
Yeah. Okay.
You can't do anything about it. So I would say something, both to friends and to professionals. And I would seriously take into consideration anything that your mental health professionals tell you to do. Like, I've been to counseling for multiple years. I've tried multiple different medications. And obviously not every combination or everything has worked flawlessly. Of course not. But I would just have an open mind and an open heart to try the different things that they may be offering you.
And the responsibility of a Christian community. Like I always say to people, find a great community to be a part of. I think my whole life, through all the struggles I've had, have always been surrounded by people and a community. And so I say that. But then on the other side, how can we as people in community support these people? I want to learn. Like if I'm in a church community, I'm in a Christian community in the work that I do. How do I support people in a sort of proper and healthy way?
Absolutely. One thing I would say is listen before you talk, right? Like, be very slow to give advice. Unless it's like you directly have dealt with something like that and you have something to say. Because oftentimes it's just that stuff gets filed, back in your mind. Like when I was going through all this, someone said, "Oh, well, go and do this." I had too much in my mind to think about that. So just to know that there's someone listening. The other thing is, I would say, and there's something that I love about the culture of the church that I'm a part of, is that we don't say, "I'll pray for you." We pray for them in the moment.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have this, like, I have tried to make a promise to myself to never say, "I'll pray for you," without actually praying for you.
I'll pray for you now. Like, why pray
and
later?
there.
Yep.
And then just be available, right? That if somebody if they're scared to go to the doctor, maybe, and if you have the relationship with them, maybe say, "You know what? If you're having an issue, I'll come with you." Or you're really having a hard time picking up the phone to make that call for the appointment. Hey, I'll do that for you. To do something practical, to ask the person what they need, because oftentimes the people that are struggling actually know what they need better than you might think they do.
I remember when I was going through my depression and I just couldn't do anything. And I remember my community coming and knocking on the door and actually coming into my apartment and bringing food and casseroles and cleaning my house, even when I didn't even ask.
Brilliant.
Because they knew that's what I needed. I'm lying on the couch. I can't get up. I can't do anything. And that's what they did. And, my girlfriends would throw me into the shower, brush my hair. Like, it was really where they saw the need and they loved in such, and it makes me quite emotional. It's that place of, I'm seeing how Melinda is so broken and can't do anything. So we will be the hands and feet of Jesus for her. And I think that's the key for the church, is that I think we need to step it up. Culture and society are trying to do that with, like Let's Talk programs and trying to take away the stigma of, mental illness and working hard. And I believe the church needs to work just as hard and to see the need and step into, that kind of care and loving our neighbor as ourselves, asking God, how can I help, my neighbor, my friend in this greatest need? And it's messy. It's hard. Like, this isn't just like, hey, it's hard work to, sometimes walk beside someone like this. But that's the call of life with Jesus. Jordan, the more that as I get older, the more I realize that, life with Jesus is not this easy walk in the park. It is a journey. It is sacrifice. It is hard work. It is messy. But that's the joy in it. That's where you learn the most about yourself and others, right?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of community and family, right? It's messy, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Like, some of the people that I have walked through my darkest days with are the people that I'm walking with today.
Yeah.
The friends that I had before, like that experience, that Labor Day experience in 2013 was actually really the beginning of a whole new life, because there were the people that stayed a part of my life in that season that are still with me. And there are the people that walked away and I don't talk to them anymore. And no hard feelings, no judgment,
yep.
But it was the people that are willing to walk with you in the valley and to ask how are you doing and actually want to know. Mm-hmm. Like and maybe I'm being a bit too real for some people, but I don't ask how are you doing if I don't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, because I don't want to give the illusion that I'm being anything but real. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about being disrespectful and all that, but be genuine. Listen, hear what the other person has to say.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I feel like I've grown in empathy as an interviewer, because, and you would know this, that the job is to actually listen for the sake of listening, because your next question, if it doesn't relate to what's being said, people are going to see right through that. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't a show, this is a show, but this isn't an act, this isn't scripted. You're asking me questions, I'm answering, and you're being genuine and responding, and this is the model of the kind of conversation that we need to be having.
Mm-hmm. You know, as I listen to you, and we just have a short time left, but some of the takeaways that are really, sticking out for me here, as we talk about a topic of mental illness and mental health that 1 in 5 Canadians will be faced with, probably that number is the same in North America, and as we look at stats around the world. But a couple of things I learned from you today, Jordan, and your story. So the first very practical one is that if you have symptoms like this, don't hide it. Don't
Amen.
Push it aside. Go to your doctor and get to the root of it. And I think I say that to, and I'm not trying to be general, but to men, mm-hmm. especially, who always are like, oh, that's not a problem. Go, because I think that's important. And then number 2, I think you're right. Then listen to your professionals and get some help that's needed. The other thing I love is that, tell somebody, not just going to the doctor, but tell somebody that you trust, a friend, so that they know. And that, the power of saying what it is even brings relief and healing in that. Because a lot of times people keep things hidden and they're afraid and they're shamed by it. And yet you're right, and I've known this all my life, when you speak it out, there's freedom in that. And I would encourage people, what I'm hearing too, is get into a community that's authentic and real.
Absolutely.
You pray for them right away. Sometimes you split up. Other times, you can talk honestly. You see the needs. And I think that's key. But I think the fourth takeaway I really learned from you was that seeing mental illness is not the thing. But it's for you, it's looking to the character of who Jesus is and how he loves us, and our brokenness is the thing. And to make that not the thing to focus on, it's the huge issue. But like you said, that one day it would just be like having a migraine. It's just part of who you are. We're all in this together. We all have our stuff. And then we travel along in our journey the best we can with Jesus. That's brilliant.
Well, thank you. And
just because I think I need my sort of takeaways. And I think those are practical things that can help somebody as they're, listening and going, I'm kind of there. I'm kind of struggling too.
Yeah. And, it's an honor to be here. Anytime that I get to speak to a new person or to a new audience, it's just that great pleasure.
Yeah.
To be able to do that. So thank you so much, Melinda.
Yeah, Jordan Verda, all the best. And, for, listeners and viewers, you can hear more about Jordan in his podcast, The Unspoken Conversation. He speaks all over the place. You have a website? TheUnspokenConversation.ca. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for, I think, allowing people, for the first time, our viewers and listeners, to take that first step in freedom in this area. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, wait. I know the show has ended and all, but could you introduce me to some of your really good friends? Sharing this episode on social media really helps us reach more people, and this story can inspire others to get stronger in their faith.